A warm welcome to you to this new studio vlog. Today, I'd like to share some of the things that I've had on my needles for the past couple of weeks and kind of walk you through how these designs came to be, where the inspiration came from, and why I've been so obsessed with the stitch pattern that I will be showing you in a couple of minutes. Inspiration is sometimes the weirdest thing. Coming out of nowhere and hitting you with such force that you need to stop everything that you do and fully put your attention on what this new thought is. Grabbing a piece of paper and a pen as fast as possible to write down the thought, or in this case, sketch the idea. My parents came to visit us back in February or in March, and they decided to rent a little cottage in the countryside. We joined them for that week, commuting twice so we could get a little bit of work done because the internet connection there was pretty much non-existent. And on the way back one day, I was silently looking through the car window, and out of nowhere, this idea literally hit me. And luckily I had a piece of paper and a pen nearby, so I quickly rushed to reach for them. And Edgar was driving, and he was probably wondering, what what came to me. But yeah, I just started sketching the idea, and I just simply could not leave that idea behind. And as soon as we reached the little cottage that we were renting, that very same evening, I started working on a swatch to see how this idea could translate into knitting. And I was quite quickly pleased with the stitches, how they came together, how kind of the whole thing was so fluid. And the next day I was working on an Excel document, which is where I do all of my charting, just to see how I could put all of these little stitches into a yoke design. So I needed to see where I could put the increases sections in between all of those, all of these textures. And it just happened so quickly. I cast on the same week, and pretty much the week after, the design was done. But how did that come to be? A few months ago, I found myself acquiring a little bit more of Plötulopi yarn, which turns out to be probably one of my all-time favorite yarn. I just come back to it so very often. I dream about it. I just love having it around me. I can't really explain why. But like one evening, as I was browsing the internet looking for my all-time favorite colorway, which I believe is called Ivory Beige. Let me check it out. I might not have the color name available, but it's this beautiful, like warm beige with kind of rust sometimes and brown undertones. It's just absolutely stunning. And it turned out that that specific colorway was pretty much sold out everywhere. And a very wise woman on my Patreon told me that the reason why a lot of Plötulopi, especially in the natural shades, were out of stock in most places at the end, was it the end of winter, was because the shearing, the shearing had not happened yet, which means that there was probably no wool available at the Estex fiber mill anymore. So we basically have to wait until the new shearing season starts to have yarn available on the shelves again. But luckily, I don't know if I want to share my source because then I have nowhere to shop anymore. But there's a wonderful shop in France online, which you can easily find if you make your research in French, I'm sure. That shop carried all of the colorways, and I used to order from Iceland, and it used to take a long time to come to me. I didn't think that there was retailers of Plötulopi in France, but I found this beautiful shop, and I'm so happy I did, because that evening it was like so late at night, and I had some kind of insomnia, I think, and I just placed my favorite colorway in my basket, and then there was that other colorway that was absolutely stunning that I've been wanting to try for the longest time, and I never know when the inspiration comes to me. So I just ordered 2 sweaters quantity of Plötulopi, and I'm so grateful that I did, because it turns out that just a couple of weeks later I had the urge to cast on for this sweater, which I haven't introduced you to yet. So yeah, this sweater is called Wild Posy. I love the word posy for some reason. I wanted to mix like delicate stitches that don't necessarily seem to work with very rustic yarns. I wanted to have like a low contrast type of yoke sweater, and that's the reason why I reached for Plötulopi. I wanted it to be rustic and feminine. I like this combination, this like contrast of rustic and just something, yeah, a little bit feminine. Whimsical's the word. I always get back to that one. So I finished the jumper in no time, sort of. I don't tend to swatch. Let me rephrase that. I do tend to swatch for sweaters. I always swatch for sweaters, but my swatches tend to be on the bigger side, just because I want to see how the whole thing is turning out. So it happens that sometimes I knit a full yoke just to see how the whole thing would work, instead of just knitting a little swatch of just the texture, which I did, but it did not really showcase the stitch or the full potential of what I had in mind, I guess. So I just finished the yoke once, and then I was like, oh, there's this detail that I could add and that detail that I should remove, and that's when I started working on the second yoke. And from there I just didn't stop. I just finished the sweater in like no time, I think in less than 2 weeks, and I wore it so much already because the weather has been just the most, I don't know, the coldest spring in my memory, I guess. And it's been wonderful because I didn't want to wait for the autumn to start wearing it because I just loved it so much. That being said, the Plötulopi version will be released in the fall. So if that's something that you like, you might have to wait after the summer months to start working on this project. Which brings me to the next one. Before we continue with the knitting goodness, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this video. Ana Luisa. I've been wearing Ana Luisa jewelry for over a year now, having several pieces in constant rotation. I chose to partner with Ana Luisa for this video because they are a New York-based sustainable jewelry company. As you probably know, the gold industry is detrimental not only to the planet, but also to the people that mine it. For that reason, Ana Luisa uses 100% recycled gold and silver for their pieces, which makes it more sustainable. They do their plating in-house, which means that they have more control over their production, and they also limit their CO2 emissions. They offset 100% of their carbon emissions, starting with the sourcing of their raw materials all the way to the disposal of their pieces. Their jewelry is produced in small batches, which means that they have more control over the demand of their products and therefore limit waste. And as of 2021, they became a carbon neutral company. Ana Luisa is offering you a 10% discount when you click the link in my description box. Thank you so much, Ana Luisa. After completing the winter version of this sweater, it seemed that I didn't get enough and started dreaming of a summer version. the same stitch pattern but with short sleeves instead, and worked in a beautiful organic cotton yarn. The yarn that I'm using for this second version is the softest plant-based yarn that you would think of. Have you ever touched a skin of baby alpaca? This is exactly how it feels like to me. It's nothing like a traditional cotton thread that feels dry to the touch. This yarn is butter. It's soft and fluffy, and it doesn't behave like a cotton yarn between your fingers. As for the tea version, I actually ended up knitting it twice. What might work with wool yarn doesn't necessarily apply to other types of yarn. The winter version features an eyelet section at the beginning and end of the yoke. I honestly didn't give it much thought when working with the cotton yarn, but I forgot that cotton yarn and wool yarn don't behave the same way. Cotton doesn't have any stretch, which means that small details and imperfections will show way more than with the wool yarn, which is more bouncy and forgiving. So after completing the yoke, I realized that the eyelet simply didn't work on that version, so I ripped it back and tried something else. I ended up changing the numbers so I could incorporate the beautiful wrap stitch, which is at the center of the yoke, to its two extremities instead of the eyelets. And I must say that I'm so pleased with the end results. The cotton yarn is giving way more textural contrast than with the Plötulopi yarn, which is more hairy and fluffy. I recently placed an order for more knitting needles as my Chiago set was missing some of the larger sizes and a few extra cables as well, because I always end up having to go through my project bags and the different places where I tend to put my needles instead of keeping them safely in the needle case. So whenever I feel like swatching or casting on a new project, I always end up not having the cable needles that I need for my work. So I ordered a few more in the small size and some that I could use for the larger needles. And the reason why I placed an order for more needles right now is that I am actually going to close Mandarines as a company, and I'm going to reopen as like a sole entrepreneur or a freelancer rather. So now is the time to invest in some knitting tools that I will need in the future for my work, as I will not be able to include any expenses in the future. So the other thing that I got and that I wasn't aware of is this little rubber type of I don't really know how it's called. It's this piece of rubber that you use to secure the needles to the cable, so then they do not unravel. And this thing has been life-changing because my needles kept like unraveling or like separating from the cord. And since purchasing this little accessory, I haven't had any issue with my cables.